Once again, so as we indicated, in the next hour, we'll take you live to a media briefing by the KwaZulu-Natal Premier, Sihle Zikalala. So following visuals that we showed you a bit earlier on, seeing the Health MEC, Nomagugu Simelane Zulu, at a gathering without a mask, allegedly breaking COVID-19 regulations. Those visuals had surfaced sometime last week. So shortly after that, in a statement, the MEC said that she was under the impression that she was being called to a meeting, but learned on her arrival that it was a surprise birthday lunch. Those visuals, basically, she said she regretted not wearing a mask. As seen in those visuals that we showed you a bit earlier on, she was dancing as well with some of the attendees at that celebration. Political analyst Sanusha Naidoo joins me now live to look a bit at this before we go to that briefing at the top of the next hour. Sanusha, very good evening to you. Thanks indeed for your time. So, I mean, if the Premier is, I guess, serious about governance and any form of accountability, what should we be expecting Premier Sihle Zikalala to say tonight?
Good evening, Griselda, and to the viewers. Well, hopefully it is not a kind of easy pass for the MEC, considering the visuals we saw, and more importantly, considering the fact that these are people and officials in positions of power, and they need to be held to a certain standard and a certain kind of accountability because of the office that they hold and the oath that they take when they assume that office. I think being the MEC for health, again, makes the situation even more dire for the MEC as well as for the Premier. And hopefully it's not going to be a kind of, easy pass, a kind of slap on the wrist approach, but rather one that indicates how serious the Premier is and how serious the ANC in the province is about this COVID situation. We know that the province is reaching its peak with regard to transmission and infection rates. We know that they are also struggling in certain areas to vaccinate at a higher rate in terms of vaccinations. But at the same time, we cannot afford to have in these times situations that unfold like we saw last week. It's unfortunate, but at the same time, these are individuals that know they are public officials. They know that there is a standard at which they need to carry themselves and the decorum of the office they represent, even as a provincial officer or a provincial MEC, no matter where you are, you need to set an example. And I'm hoping that the Premier makes this not just a kind of flimsy approach, but rather one that says he's serious about the repercussions and the sanctions that need to be held. I am not convinced that the response by the MEC is something that we should be considering as, oh, I didn't know. It's a matter of the situation after the fact. And at the moment, if you didn't know there was a surprise party happening for you, well, surely your colleagues should know that there are COVID-19 regulations and this is not on.
Sanusha, I mean, are you holding your breath at all that it might not just be some slap on the wrist? Recall that there were other incidents involving high-profile persons. There was Stella Ndabeni-Abrams, Mduma Nana, and also the Premier of Mpumalanga, Refilwe Mutsweni. I mean, almost nothing happened in those instances. And at that particular time, we'd been at the height of the COVID-19 fight in South Africa.
You know, Griselda, I want to say I'm hoping, but I really don't see where my sense of optimism comes. Because it seems to me that this whole process, this whole issue of dealing with the COVID-19 lockdown measures, dealing with the regulations, holding our officials accountable for their actions and for them to be held accountable by their own standards and their own actions just seems to fly out of the window. So I'm not necessarily at that level where we seem to be holding ordinary South Africans and citizens to a level of accountability and trying to basically affect the kind of regulations and ensure that people abide by them. And yet, when we look at our officials in government, whether at provincial or national level, they seem to be flouting the rules as if there's no sanction or there's no punitive action that needs to be taken. And I think the time has come for us to stop seeing these individuals as individuals that just did not know. At the end of the day, you set the whole scene by example. You actually show the example in which you tell people to abide by rules. If you're not going to abide by rules, why do you expect the ordinary public not to,
but what
to
does
do
it
so?
say generally about their behaviour then? I mean, the climate that we are in currently, people are still dying as a result of COVID-19 complications. South Africa is still within its vaccination rollout process. What can we interpret, from this kind of behaviour?
One word, arrogance. And I think for me, that is what it is. It's as if I don't need to be held accountable. I'm not accountable. And it's not just about this COVID-19 regulation. It's not about abiding by the regulation rules and what we have set as the lockdown measures 3, but it's just general arrogance. And I think the time has come for us to basically say that we're tired of this arrogance. We're tired of the way you behave. Because at the end of the day, these flimsy excuses that are made, it's just not cutting it anymore. It's just not going to be basically providing the kind of trust. I mean, last week there was a survey that was released by the Afrobarometer, and it showed the level of trust in government across the board. It is at its lowest in 15 years.
And this
at the end
help.
of the day, and this doesn't help. Exactly.
I mean, this is not just, you indicated, just an ordinary person. This is the health MEC of that particular province. I mean, what does this say in terms of, I guess, how the ordinary people of the province should behave? If you have the health MEC of that province being caught flouting the COVID-19 regulations, basically.
Well, it says to ordinary people, well, if you can do it, I can do it. I mean, that's the general stance, right? And it actually says that if you don't feel that this virus is being taken seriously and you're not taking it seriously, and as we're talking, we're seeing this image on a loop, and it's just very disturbing in what we're seeing in this image, then you expect me to do the same. Why? And I think the second issue around this, Griselda, is the question of what's going to be done. Should there be an investigation? Yes, definitely. I think we're going to hear that in the Premier's press briefing later on. But the question is, where is it all going to end? Is it some kind of investigation? Is there some kind of representation where she has to present the situation and account for it? Is this just going to be an exercise in theatrics? Exercise in just a theoretical approach.
But Sanusha, sorry, just before we run out of time, apologies to interject there, but certainly politics would play a part in whatever decision that the Premier of KwaZulu-Natal makes regarding this. We know the politics of KwaZulu-Natal, and this is the health MEC of the province. KwaZulu-Natal has its own fair share of factional political politics. So would we perhaps see that kind of positioning also play a role in whatever we're going to hear come 6 o'clock this evening?
Well, what you're really asking me is that given the fact that it's such a contested province, will this actually impact on the local government elections? Now, let's leave everything else aside in terms of whether they've managed to get their candidate lists registered online with the IEC. Yeah. But there's another question here, and that is, this is not about politics. This is about behavior in a time of a crisis and a virus.
But wouldn't that also play a part? It's given the factional political play in KwaZulu-Natal, yes, this is about behaviour, but obviously you really have to look at to what certain degree in terms of proximity do we have the health MEC of the province, any sanction against us, such a critical time, while the province itself is facing, like other parts of the country, facing a crisis of COVID-19.
You see, Griselda, once you start politicizing the situation, then you're taking away the real issue at hand here. And that is, there is a lockdown measure. There was no mask wearing. The reason that the MEC has given is so flimsy that if she didn't know there was going to be this party, the other obvious course of action she had is, if there was a surprise party, she had very well within her rights to say, I'm holding to my behavior and I'm walking away. The problem with this debate is that it's becoming politicized because suddenly now we're saying it's going to actually turn into these factional battle lines in terms of the party. I think we're beyond that. Those battle lines exist whether you take any sanction or no sanction against this individual, because that party is already in a state of crisis when it comes to factionalism. It's beyond a point of no return. So for me, I think that if you really want to show confidence in your party and trust in your party and that your party actually abides by rules, then do the right thing.
Sanusha, thank you very much. Always a pleasure speaking to you. I understand from our team we'll be speaking to you after that briefing as well. We'll monitor that at 6 o'clock. The KwaZulu-Natal Premier, Sihle Zikalala, holding a media briefing, of course, on those visuals that we saw of the Health MEC allegedly flouting COVID-19 rules at a party or gathering that was being held. Those visuals are surfacing last weekend. Political analyst Sanusha Naidoo, thank you very much. We'll take a short break. You're on the